Chapter 3. School. On the first day of school, Emily stood in front of the mirror, wearing a dark green polo shirt with black pants, her new school uniform. She was trying to fix her hair in a way that would soften the hard outlines of the uniform. Emily noticed Tess in the mirror, standing behind her. "I hate this uniform," she said. "We both look exactly the same." "I think that's the point, Em," said Tess, ever wise, as 10-year-old girls can be. "It's supposed to take away class differences and make us all look the same." Tess smiled, happy to look like her big sister. As she boarded the bus, one of a fleet of 60 minivans sent out by the school to retrieve students from around the city, Emily was uncomfortably aware of the boxy green shirt hanging over her waistband and wondered how it could look so much better on the other girls she saw on the bus. She studied them carefully, noticing that one girl had twisted the bottom of the shirt to make it hang on a diagonal, and another had tucked it in and made it billow above the waistband of her pants. These were fashion modifications foreign to Emily, whose wardrobe relied heavily on sculpted t-shirts and jeans. Defeated, Emily settled into the box she was wearing. The international school was situated in the countryside, several kilometers outside the city. After the hour-long ride, Emily was happy to stretch her stiff legs. Solomon noticed that he and Ben were the only ones entering the school who had the brown skin of Ethiopia. He looked everywhere, his radar attempting to detect other similar faces, but they were mostly white and Asian. Instinctively, he put a protective arm around Ben's shoulder, letting it fall when his little brother ran ahead with the new friend he had met on the bus. Solomon walked slowly toward the school and wished, not for the first time, that he was as carefree as his brother. As he entered the school, he caught a glimpse of another dark face emerging from a limousine. Raj watched the buses arrive from the back seat of his uncle's limo. As the students disembarked, he could see by the variety of skin and hair colors that they were from many different countries. Although he had attended a prestigious private school in Delhi, this was the first time he would attend school with people from different cultures. Mei Ling arrived alone. Her father left her at the front door, where he would return to pick her up after school. Their schedules were coordinated like a finely oiled machine. Although she lived as far from the school as many of the other students and was entitled to ride in one of the minivans, her mother insisted she drive to school with her father. For her parents, this daily ritual enshrined the importance of her education. For Mei Ling, it was just another lost opportunity to make friends. The first day of school followed a predictable pattern. Homeroom assignments were announced, punctuated by shrieks of joy from friends who discovered a shared homeroom and moans of misery from those torn apart. This was followed by the semester's rotation of classes, then locker assignments and a quick tour of the building. Finally, the morning ended with the school assembly. The hallways teemed with nervous energy as students filed into the auditorium. Their restless eyes flitted from face to face, searching for friends, new and old. Raj sauntered to the auditorium. A natural order had quickly established itself around him, and he was followed by a handful of boys who had been drawn immediately to his authoritative presence. Emily was amazed by the number of different languages she heard spoken that morning. She waited in line next to the other new girl in her class, and they laughed quietly together. Her name was Laura, and she had just arrived from Denmark for her first year in an international school. Laura was as lost as Emily when they met in homeroom, and a natural affinity had led them into easy conversation. Solomon stood out in line, taller than all his classmates, except for one, a boy with a surfer tan and sun-bleached hair. When he noticed Solomon staring at him, he loped across the stream of students to say hello, a warm smile on his face. Mei Ling waited in line next to Chen, another Vietnamese girl in her class. They had been assigned the same homeroom several times over the years and had formed a quiet solidarity, one that required no effort to maintain. With the same all-consuming focus on academic achievement, they hadn't spent much time together over the years, even though school cliques were usually formed around language of comfort. The second day of school was the first day of classes. Raj was particularly curious about math class, his favorite subject, but as he entered the classroom, he cringed with disgust at the walls lined with hockey sticks. Clearly, Mr. Brown was a fan. The teacher gesticulated with enthusiasm as he explained his new methods for teaching math. Raj rolled his eyes when Mr. Brown asked them to display their calculations on the whiteboard desktops. Why can't we just use the old method and work in private, wondered Raj. He recognized a kindred spirit when the Chinese girl sitting directly across from him rolled her eyes as well. She quickly lowered her head when he looked at her. At the start of second period, Raj was worried that he would encounter another New Age teacher like Mr. Brown. He was relieved when he met his biology teacher, a short, round, elderly Indian gentleman with big dark-rimmed glasses. Mr. Matthews started the class by saying, "Now, my dear friends," and continued in a fatherly manner to describe his more traditional methods for teaching biology. Ah, thought Raj, now that's more like it. After years at the school, Mei Ling knew all the teachers, so when she entered Mr. Wilson's history class for second period, her trepidation was well-founded. Mr. Wilson's reputation preceded him, and she was nervous to be sitting directly in front of him. Mr. Wilson was the grade 10 history teacher. He was a Renaissance man, a jazz musician at night, and a font of knowledge about obscure historical facts during the day. He often burst unexpectedly into song as a way to make a point, or would ask students to do something equally intimidating, like stand in front of the class and reveal everything about last night's homework assignment. During the first class, he informed them, attendance will count for 30% of your grade, and the rest will be based equally on class participation and your final assignment. He paused for effect. Of course, the majority of your mark for participation will be earned in October, when the entire grade 10 population will spend the day walking the perimeter of the school property to reenact Mao's 8,000-mile long march. Mr. Wilson's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm, but the day-long journey didn't sound like much fun to Mei Ling. By lunch, Solomon was exhausted. Although happy with his teachers and classes, in particularly he was looking forward to the long march. What a great way to learn something that would have been pretty boring otherwise, he thought, as he entered the cafeteria. When he saw Ben bounding toward him, he pulled a small stash of money from his pocket. His mom had given him enough to buy lunch for both of them, a temporary measure until they had an apartment and could make lunch at home. He gave some money to Ben so he could buy his own lunch and sit with his new friends. Solomon looked around the cafeteria, aware that this was one of those make-or-break moments where the choice of where to sit could be a curse or a blessing for the rest of the school year. "Hey, Solomon, come on over!" He turned to see Shane, the tall, blonde-haired guy he had met outside the auditorium. He was sitting at a table filled with what was evidently the school's basketball team. Emily bumped into a tall black student as she entered the cafeteria, in search for a place to sit. "Sorry," he mumbled, fumbling to put change in his pockets. She smiled at him, taking in his height and soft, nervous smile. It was she who should have apologized. "No problem." She stepped out of his way, adjusting her bag over her shoulder, and looked around the cafeteria anxiously. She noticed that some of the girls were fidgeting with their cell phones in the food line, pretending they knew the routine, not wanting to appear nervous, uncertain where to sit. She felt equally self-conscious, but she refused to let it show, as she glanced around the room, considering whom to sit with. After several seconds, she recognized some people from her homeroom and walked over to join them. She smiled when one of the boys welcomed her by sliding along the bench to make room for her to sit. After lunch, Emily set off in search of her math room. As she rounded the corner outside the classroom, she bumped into an Indian guy who was talking on his cell phone, waving his hands as he spoke. She couldn't help but notice his large silver ring. "Hey, watch where you're going," he growled at her. "Sorry," she mumbled, caught off guard. Rather than returning a smile or a friendly gesture to let her off the hook, He just stared at her, his sneer erasing his good looks. She stared back for a moment, caught in the intensity of his smoldering dark eyes. "Sorry," she said again, and slipped into Ms. Dodd's math class a couple minutes late. Once Emily had taken her seat, Ms. Dodd started the class with something she called a mad minute. The students were given 60 math questions to answer in 1 minute. Emily successfully completed only 2 of the 60 questions and wondered what her good math grades in Canada were worth here. She hid her results and felt even worse when she saw that most of the students had completed at least 15 questions. Emily forced a smile. She noticed the tall guy she had bumped into at lunch sitting across the room. He had the same discouraged look on his face. At the end of the day, the school lobby looked like an airport departure lounge, as students sat in small groups surrounded by their school bags, waiting for the minivans to depart. When the bell rang, signaling departure time, they shot out the door. Exhausted, Emily trailed behind them to the bus, searching the crowd for Tess's distinctive red curls. There was the tall guy again, with his arm around a boy who had to be his brother. Mei Ling held her books close to her chest as she navigated through the throngs of students to find her dad's car in front of the school. She noticed a limousine parked next to the small Toyota and wondered who would be coming to school in such style. Chapter 4. The Homework Assignment. Early October brought cooler days and longer nights. A natural rhythm had been established as students settled into the demands of school life. The homework load steadily increased, as did the pressure to perform. The international school in Beijing, like its companion schools, was designed to prepare the elite athletes of international academics. The high standards of the Asian countries meant there were extra demands for achievement, a fact that Emily was becoming uncomfortably aware of. She was working harder than she had ever worked at school in Canada and was still only just keeping up. One day, the 10th grade students were called to the library to receive instructions for the legendary grade 10 history assignment. Mr. Wilson waited calmly as the small army of students arrived, some settling in to sit while others stood, fidgeting with binders and bags, and shifting their weight from foot to foot. "Okay, here it is, the big assignment," Mr. Wilson said, once they were mostly settled. "It's got the potential to be pretty interesting if you put your minds to it. Now, we know there have been prophecies of end times for as long as people have told stories," he said. "Some of the oldest known stories predict the end of the earth or the end of the human race. Even recently, we have the example of the Mayan calendar, which predicted the end of the world would come in 2012. You will be required to produce a 2,000-word paper about prophecies of the end times from your own part of the world. Some of you may find it difficult to uncover such prophecies from your own culture. Search diligently in your home country, perhaps in a cultural group other than your own. You will find legends of interest, I promise you," he said, his enthusiasm untouched by the bland faces in front of him. "This assignment is about source analysis, so I want you to see your reading list by the end of November and your thesis and outline before Christmas break. The finished paper is due May 27th, just before final exams." He paused. "Any questions?" "What are these teachers thinking?" Beth asked Emily as they stood in line at the cafeteria. "Are they piling on the stress just to toughen us up?" Emily thought Beth's British accent made her sound particularly intelligent. They had met the first week of school at volleyball tryouts and hit it off when they kept pace with each other during the warm-up run around the gym. "Maybe it's a conspiracy to see if they can break us," Amelia said, joining them in line. Amelia was the volleyball team's best setter. "Apparently only the ones who do well in this assignment make it in university. It's your research skills they're testing," she continued. "As long as you have a lot of good sources, you're okay." For some reason, Emily was excited about the assignment. "I think it's kind of interesting," she said, as they turned to find 3 seats together. When Emily got home from school, she opened her laptop to begin researching. She knew there weren't many stories of end times from Canada, at least none that she knew of. She remembered her parents telling her about Y2K in the millennium year, but that wasn't particular to Canada. She didn't know much about the Bible stories of Armageddon, as church was foreign to her. She had heard the recent stories about the end of the 5,000-year Mayan calendar, which some thought signified the end of the world. But, like all the other events, it came and went and the world was still intact. Solomon was uneasy about the assignment and procrastinated, hoping to delay his research until the last minute. "I don't understand why we're doing this," he complained to himself. He didn't need any more stress in his life. He already had enough to take care of with his mom and brother and adjusting to this new country. Going online only made him feel worse. He searched for end times, and it took 10 minutes to get past the sites for biblical references. He found a site that looked promising, but it turned out to be the title of a newly released rock album. Beyond that, there were internet sites for survivalist groups, fantasy fiction novels, and computer games. "Finally," he exclaimed when he discovered a number of sites about the Mayan calendar. The Mayans believed in something called the calendar round that tracked time as a cycle. This is interesting, he thought, and he read for a while until he remembered that the Mayans had no relationship with Ethiopia and he would have to keep looking. By dinner time, the internet had revealed nothing useful. He decided he would have to search the school library to find a relevant book. Raj knew this assignment would require him to read the Mahabharata. The famous Indian epic of the final war between good and evil had attracted him from an early age. He loved the theatrical renditions of the story he had seen as a child, with the final battles that were fought in order to reestablish a world of goodness, but the size of the book killed his desire to read it. The story told of a time when corruption ruled the world, when good people lived in constant fear, stress, and loneliness, and when war and chaos were normal. A lot like the world today, he thought. He sighed and left his room to ask Auntie for her copy of the big book. "I'm not getting anywhere," thought Mei Ling, as she scrolled through websites that were mostly alarmist and frightening. Where are the myths and cultural stories, she wondered. She decided to ask her dad for advice on the way to school the next morning. "End times," he laughed. "You mean like now?" "I don't know," she said, startled. "What do you mean like now? You think these are end times?" "Well, the entire world economy is crumbling. North Korea has nuclear capacity. Unpredictable pandemics continue to erupt, and the environment is in crisis. Sure sounds like end times to me." Mei Ling wasn't sure whether he was being sarcastic or just honest. Well, I guess." She looked at him with concern. "Dad, are you okay?" "Well, some people say the world's getting better. I don't see it myself." He turned to smile at her, his silver-rimmed glasses reflecting the morning sun. Mei Ling felt like she had just stepped into her parents' room when she shouldn't have. She wondered if all fathers had a dark inner world they kept hidden from their children. Maybe this is what happens when kids get older, she thought, and were admitted to the world of adult worries. "Thanks, Dad," she said uneasily when he pulled up in front of the school. She got out of the car and headed to the library, hoping she'd find a good book there. Chapter 3. The Book. The school library was arranged like a modern bookstore, with soft chairs for lingering and open spaces that wrapped themselves around towering bookshelves. The only thing it lacked was a cafe. Although after-school time was usually spent with friends and schoolwork, Emily loved to curl up with a book. Today she was waiting in the library while Tess tried out for the badminton team. The library was a welcome refuge from socializing and trying always to be at her best. Her 2 fingers flew across the keyboard as she searched for myths and prophecies about the future. A list of titles appeared on the screen, including Tales of the End Times from All Cultures. Many of the myths were Greek or Indian. There was nothing obviously Canadian except for one book of legends from First Nations people. She decided to use alternate names like Native Americans and New World. She scribbled the call numbers on a scrap piece of paper, noting down any book that seemed remotely related, including one that drew her attention, New Beginnings. She gathered the legend books before finding New Beginnings in the end section of the nearest aisle. It was much smaller than the other books. Its cover was a royal purple with gold print for the title, and its pages were filled with dense text and several tiny colored pictures embossed with metallic paint. It smelled like the incense sticks her mom sometimes used at home and was crisp and clean to the touch. She checked it out at the front desk and settled into one of the library chairs to read. The subtitle of the book was The 7 Secrets of the Universe, and its premise was simple. There were 7 secrets that, when understood, would unlock a person's consciousness, transforming their understanding of themselves and their relationship to the world. After a quick review of the table of contents, she flipped to the beginning and read without stopping. The book began with a chapter entitled The Jewel of Eternal Life and ended with The Final Secret. Emily was intrigued by the idea that endings were illusions and simply doorways to new beginnings. Mei Ling found New Beginnings and finished reading it quickly. She had taken the book home from the library and kept it hidden inside her desk drawer, unsure why she didn't want her parents to see it. Somehow it felt private and secret, especially given its optimism and her dad's obvious cynicism. It was much more interesting than she had expected. She was feeling more positive about the future of the world, although she was worried about wasting her time with a book not directly required for the history assignment. She liked the idea of 7 secrets that could change human consciousness. She was particularly drawn to the secret called the Wheel of Powers, which described the inner powers required to transform the forces of negativity, greed, and anger in the world. She remembered learning about hard and soft power in humanities class when they studied leaders throughout history. Leaders like Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini were used as examples of hard power because they used fear and force to dominate and control. Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and Martin Luther King were offered as examples of soft power because they used values, principles, and the integrity of their character to motivate and inspire action. She wondered how ordinary people using these powers could change the world. Now I need prophecies from Vietnam, she thought. Grudgingly, she put the book aside and thumbed through the heavy volumes she had found on Southeast Asia. Solomon waited as long as possible before visiting the library to research the assignment. His search had drifted away from the exact specifications of the essay when he finally found a book that sounded interesting. When he went to find it on the shelves, he discovered he would have to put his name on the waiting list for it. Several days later, when it was his turn for New Beginnings, he read without stopping, surprised to find it so compelling. He was quickly engrossed in the section called The Feather of Truth and the Family Tree. The Feather of Truth described how a memory of every action and experience was stored in the subconscious to form consistent patterns of behavior in a person. Ultimately, this shaped their character. He liked the idea of the law of karma, as it was called in the book. This simple system of justice ensured that all actions, good and bad, were returned to a person, balancing relations like a math equation. Solomon loved biology, so when he read the section called The Family Tree, he imagined the tree of humanity as a warka tree, the giant fig that once grew wild in Ethiopia. This section suggested that the virtues of peace, Love and happiness were the roots that held humanity together. Although he enjoyed the little book, he couldn't pretend it was about end times in Ethiopia, so he returned New Beginnings to the library. Raj was in the library to search for short stories from India. After spending 2 hours lost in the detailed names and characters of the Mahabharata, he knew he would have to find an easier story. The plot line was as complex as the historical and tribal grievances of today's news story. It's not very helpful if it all ends in a war, he thought. A search on the library computer revealed no other Indian myths about end times, so he changed his approach. Mr. Wilson had said the assignment focused on source analysis, so he decided to research the origins of the Mahabharata. The only book that appeared was entitled New Beginnings. When he couldn't find it on the shelf, Raj asked the librarian for help. "Oh, this has become quite a popular book," Miss Jessam said. "This week alone I had 3 people wanting to sign it out. What's so special about it?" "It's for a homework assignment," said Raj, "and it sounds like it might be useful. Who else wanted it?" "Oh, I can't tell you that, but they were probably grade 10 students. After all, it's time for Mr. Wilson's prophecies assignment. Every year the grade 10 students get depressed or scared about the future. It's not my favorite assignment, but it's better than the year he made them study genocide." She paused while punching keys on the computer keyboard. "Interesting," she said. No one has ever signed out this particular book before this year." The phone rang, and she turned from the computer to answer it. Raj looked at the computer screen and made a quick mental note of the names of the other students reading the same book. Emily, Mei Ling, and Solomon were listed on the screen in that order. "Okay, Raj," Miss Jessam said when she returned. "I'll put your name on the list." He was surprised and a little flattered that she knew his name already. They'd only been at school for a few weeks. When he finally read the book, he was most interested in the section called The Cup of Life. He remembered the first time his mother had drawn a picture of time turning like a wheel when she tried to help him understand how the past could become the future, just as the future, once lived, became the past. The silent voice section puzzled and intrigued him, as it was quite a different description of a divine being than anything he knew. Although it was an enjoyable read, he saw no use for the book. He returned it to the library and began to search online for summaries of the Mahabharata.